If you've ever been told to just let the past be the past, I want you to listen to this. Because I learned that some pasts aren't really past at all. They're alive. They're breathing in the walls of old houses. They're written in the fine print of wills. And sometimes, if you're very, very unlucky, you find them tattooed under the ink of a beautiful lie you've built your entire future on. My name is Bryn, and I'm a historical map restorer. My hands have always been more comfortable with the delicate touch of vellum than the press of human flesh. I find solace in the crisp, dusty smell of centuries-old paper, in the silent stories told by faded coastlines and forgotten sea routes. It was this love for history, this obsession with the tangible remnants of time, that led me to Julian Willoughby. And it was Julian who led me, unknowingly, to the brink of a truth so monstrous it threatened to swallow us all. Julian was, for lack of a better word, perfect. He was a scion of the Willoughby family, one of Charleston's most revered and respected founding families. Their name was etched into the very fabric of the city, on the brass plaques of museum wings, the stone facades of university libraries, and the glossy pages of high society magazines. And he was a scion of the Willoughby family, one of Charleston's most revered and respected fine. They were old money, a term people in Charleston whisper with a kind of religious reverence. It implies a stability, a nobility, a legacy untainted by the grubby hustle of new wealth. Julian carried this legacy with an easy grace, his charm as natural and constant as the tide. He loved my passion for history, saw it as a quaint and fitting hobby for the woman who would one day be a Willoughby herself. He'd visit my studio, a sun-drenched loft smelling of linseed oil and archival paper, and watch me work for hours, his presence a warm, solid weight in my quiet world. His father, Marcus Willoughby, was the patriarch, the sun around which the entire family, and much of Charleston society, orbited. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, with a voice that could command boardrooms and charm philanthropists in the same breath. When Julian first brought me to the family estate, a sprawling, white-pillared mansion dripping with wisteria and history, Marcus had shaken my hand, his eyes crinkling in a practiced smile. He'd spoken at length about legacy, about the duty of families, like his, to preserve the past and build the future. I was mesmerized. I was in love, not just with Julian, but with the entire beautiful, stately fiction of his family. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday. It arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet thrill of a professional victory. I'd acquired a set of 3 18th-century nautical charts at a private auction. They were exquisite, hand-drawn maps of the Atlantic trade routes, their vellum softened by sea salt and time. The auction house had limited provenance, only that they'd been found in a forgotten chest in an estate in the Caribbean. To me, they were treasures, a direct link to a world of wooden ships and iron men. I couldn't wait to begin the restoration, to uncover the secrets they held. I took them back to my studio, feeling that familiar sense of reverence I reserved for my work. For the first few days, the work was routine. I carefully cleaned the surfaces, stabilized the brittle edges, and began the process of analyzing the ink composition. That's when my world tilted on its axis. I use multispectral imaging to see what the naked eye can't, to differentiate between original ink and later additions, to find details lost to time and decay. I was examining a section of the first map, a route charting a path from the Gold Coast of Africa to the Caribbean, when I saw it. Underneath the bold, confident lines of the primary cartographer, there was something else, a ghost, faint, spidery script, written in a different, iron gall ink that had faded to a pale, almost invisible brown. My heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. This was not a correction, this was something else entirely. I adjusted the imaging filters, increasing the contrast, and the ghost script sharpened into focus. It wasn't cartographic notes, it was a list, a column of numbers, followed by terse, brutal descriptions. 187 souls, 12 lost. 214 souls, 21 lost. Profit, £4,500. My breath hitched. I moved the scanner across the map, and then to the other two. It was all there. A hidden layer of pure, unadulterated evil. This wasn't just a set of maps. It was a ledger, a meticulously kept record of human trafficking, of the buying and selling of lives. It detailed the locations of where ships had gone down in storms, their human cargo chained in the hold, with cold calculations of the financial losses insured. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I felt a profound sense of desecration, as if I had unearthed a mass grave. Then I saw the final detail, the one that made the floor drop out from under me. At the bottom corner of the third map, hidden beneath a decorative compass rose, was a signature. The ink was faded, but the name was unmistakable, written in an elegant, looping script I'd seen on countless family documents and historical plaques. Willoughby, Josiah Willoughby, the revered founder of the dynasty, the man credited with building a shipping empire from nothing. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The Willoughby fortune, the old money, the museums, the libraries, the entire pristine legacy. It wasn't built on shipping goods. It was built on shipping people. It was a fortune built on one of history's greatest crimes. I stumbled back from my workstation, my hands shaking so violently, I had to clench them into fists. I felt sick. For a long time, I just stood there. The silence of my studio roaring in my ears, the ghosts of those lost souls seeming to whisper from the vellum. My first coherent thought was Julian. I had to tell Julian. He would be as horrified as I was. He loved his family, yes, but he was a good man. He would see the moral abomination for what it was. When I showed him that evening, his face went ashen. He stared at the high-resolution images on my screen, retracing the faint ledger entries with a trembling finger. He read the numbers, the profits, the name. He looked like he was going to be sick. But then, something shifted in his eyes. The horror was replaced by a flicker of something else. Fear, denial. He started muttering, "This can't be right. It must be a mistake, a forgery." I walked him through the science, the ink analysis, the way the hidden ledger ink was chemically bonded with the vellum in a way that proved it was contemporary to the original map. It was irrefutable. He didn't want to believe it. I have to talk to my father," he said, his voice strained. That was his first mistake, and my second was letting him. The summons came the next morning. Not a request, a summons. Marcus Willoughby wanted to see me at the estate, alone. Julian drove me. The silence in his luxury sedan, thick enough to choke on. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. I was led not into the warm, inviting family parlor, but into Marcus's study. It was a room designed to intimidate. All dark wood, leather-bound books, and portraits of stern-faced Willoughby ancestors. Marcus was standing by the fireplace, his back to me. He turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask of civility. "Bryn," he said, his voice smooth as polished mahogany. "Julian has told me about your discovery." I held my ground. "It's not a discovery, Marcus. It's the truth." He gave a small dismissive wave of his hand. "History is filled with uncomfortable truths. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." He walked over to his desk and gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Those maps, they are a unique historical artifact, of course, but they are also a private family document, one that could be easily misinterpreted by those with a less nuanced understanding of the times." "There is nothing nuanced about a slave ledger," I said, my voice colder than I intended. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before being replaced by that reptilian charm. "Of course not. It's a stain, a terrible stain from a distant ancestor, one that the family has spent 2 centuries atoning for through charity, public service, and building this city. A stain that, if revealed, would do nothing but cause pain. It would tarnish a great deal of good work. It would hurt Julian. It would hurt his mother." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a checkbook. I understand these maps are valuable. I am prepared to offer you $250,000 for them, for your silence, for your discretion. I stared at him, at the checkbook in his hand, and I felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't trying to understand the history. He was trying to buy it, to bury it, just as his family had for generations. They're not for sale, I said, quietly. And then, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The charming philanthropist vanished, and in his place was something cold, hard, and utterly ruthless. His voice dropped, losing all its warmth. I think you misunderstand me, Bryn. That wasn't a negotiation. That was a courtesy. He stood up, walking closer to me, invading my personal space. You have a charming little studio, a wonderful reputation. It would be a tragedy if something were to happen to either. A fire, a baseless accusation of fraud, from a reputable source. Things happen. Some history is best left buried. For everyone's sake, I looked at this man, my future father-in-law, and I didn't see a pillar of the community. I saw a monster, a man willing to threaten me, to protect a fortune built on human suffering. The air crackled with the unspoken violence of his words. This wasn't a family secret. It was a clear and present danger, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I left the Willoughby estate, with the echo of Marcus's threat ringing in my ears. Julian followed me out, his face pale and drawn. He opened the car door for me, a gentlemanly habit that suddenly felt like a mockery. The drive back to my apartment was a suffocating torment of silence. The engine hummed, the air conditioning blew, but the space between us was a dead vacuum. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't offer a word of comfort or defense. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, as if navigating the familiar streets of Charleston had become a treacherous ordeal. When we finally got inside my apartment, the silence broke, and it was uglier than the quiet. You can't do this, Bryn, he started, his voice a low, desperate plea. He was pacing my living room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time I could remember. Do what, Julian? Tell the truth. I shot back, my own voice trembling with a cocktail of fear and rage. Your father just threatened me. He threatened my livelihood, my safety, and you stood there and said nothing. You don't understand, he exclaimed, whirling to face me. His eyes were wide with a panic I'd never seen in him before. It wasn't panic for me. It was panic for his world, for the gilded cage he lived in. This isn't just about some old maps. This is my family, my entire family. You're talking about destroying a legacy that has done so much good for this city. What good? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. What good is built on a foundation of lies and human misery? The Willoughby name isn't a legacy, Julian. It's a ghost. It's haunted. And that money, the money that paid for your education, this car, the very suit you're wearing, it's blood money. It was 200 years ago, he yelled, his voice cracking. What good does digging it up now possibly do? It just hurts people. It hurts my mother, who knows nothing about this. It hurts my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. It hurts me. His logic was so flawed, so breathtakingly selfish, that it left me speechless. He was pleading for me to protect his comfort, to prioritize the feelings of the beneficiaries of a crime over the truth of the crime itself. This was the man I had promised to marry, to build a life with, and in this moment, he was a stranger to me, a frightened boy defending a monstrous inheritance. I sank onto my sofa, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. I was seeing the cracks in the facade, the ones I had papered over with love and optimism for years. I thought back to the first time I'd visited the Willoughby estate, almost 2 years ago. I'd been so intimidated, so in awe of the grandeur. Marcus had given me a tour, his arm linked through mine, pointing out portraits of his ancestors. He'd paused before the large, oil-painted portrait of Josiah Willoughby, the man whose signature now haunted my waking moments. A true visionary, Marcus had said, his voice resonating with pride. He saw what this city could be. He built it, not with bricks and mortar, but with will and foresight. That is our legacy, Bryn, the will to build. The irony was a physical weight in my chest, a crushing anvil of hypocrisy. He built it with the bodies of the enslaved, and his legacy was the will to hide the receipts. Then I remembered a dinner party a few months ago. One of my closest friends, Lena, had been there. Lena is sharp, progressive, and has a very low tolerance for what she calls benevolent patriarchy. She'd gotten into a mild debate with Julian about a local political issue. Julian had taken a staunchly traditionalist stance, echoing his father's views almost verbatim. Afterwards, Lena had taken me aside. "He's a good guy, Bryn," she'd said. "He doesn't have a single thought in his head that his father didn't put there first." I'd been defensive, annoyed. I'd told her she didn't understand his sense of loyalty, of family duty. Now her words echoed in my mind, a perfect, terrible prophecy. His loyalty wasn't a virtue, it was a cage. The most painful memory was a quiet one. Julian and I, sitting on a bench overlooking the harbor, just after we got engaged. We were talking about the future, about children. He'd squeezed my hand and said, "They'll be Willoughby. They'll have a name that means something, that opens doors. They'll be part of something that lasts." He'd said it with such earnestness, such pride. I had leaned my head on his shoulder, filled with a sense of security, of rightness. Now the thought of bringing a child into that legacy, of wrapping them in that blood-soaked blanket of a name, was repulsive. The weight of that name wasn't a foundation, it was a tombstone. "I need you to give me the maps, Bryn," Julian said. His voice soft now, trying a different tactic. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. His touch felt alien. "Please, let my father handle this. He'll make sure they're preserved properly. In a private archive. We can move past this. We can still have our life." I pulled my hands away. "There is no our life if it's built on this, Julian. Don't you see that? He doesn't want to preserve history. He wants to bury a crime." Our argument ended there, not with a resolution, but with a defeated sigh from him. He left, promising to call, promising he would try to talk to his father again, to make him see reason. But I knew it was a lie. He wasn't going to fight his father. He was going to try to manage me. I spent that night alone in my studio. I couldn't bear to be in my apartment, which was so full of him, of us. I had taken the maps with me, unable to let them out of my sight. I unrolled them carefully, on my largest light table, the vellum glowing from beneath. The faint, spidery script of the ledger seemed to pulse in the quiet room. The names of the ships, the Pearl, the Charity, the Good Intent, each one a cruel joke. The numbers of souls, tallied like bushels of wheat. I felt their presence in the room, the ghosts of 2 centuries, their stories silenced, their suffering monetized, and then hidden away, so that men like Marcus Willoughby could give speeches about honor. I sat there for hours, the weight of it all pressing down on me, a physical ache in my soul. I was completely, utterly alone. Julian didn't call. Finally, in the depths of the night, I did the only thing I could think to do. I called Lena. I poured out the whole story, my voice a choked whisper, the words tumbling over each other, in a torrent of fear and horror and heartbreak. She listened patiently, without interruption, until I was finished. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then her voice, clear and steady, cut through my despair. "Okay," she said. "First of all, are you safe right now?" I told her I was, that I was locked in my studio. "In a restored." "Good," she said. "Second, what they are asking you to do, what Marcus threatened you into doing, is monstrous. It's not just unethical, it's sick." And Julian, "Bryn, I'm so sorry, but he showed you who he is. He's choosing the money. He's choosing the lie." Hearing her say it, so plainly, so unequivocally, was like a splash of cold water. "I know," I whispered. "But what do I do, Lena? Marcus Willoughby practically owns this city. If I cross him, then you don't cross him head on," she said, her voice turning sharp, pragmatic. "You don't fight a bear in its own cave. You get smart, you get strategic. But whatever you do, you cannot let him win. This isn't just about history anymore, Bryn. It's about a cover-up happening right now. It's about extortion." We talked for another hour, and by the time I hung up, a tiny, fragile seed of resolve had been planted in the barren ground of my despair. I still felt lost, but not quite as alone. I packed the maps into their archival tubes, my movements slow and deliberate. I would take them home, where they would be safer. The next morning, I arrived at my studio to find the lock on the door broken, the wood of the frame splintered. My heart leaped into my throat. I pushed the door open, and a wave of cold dread washed over me. The place had been tossed, not with the professional precision of a skilled thief, but with a clumsy, violent urgency. My work tables were overturned. Jars of pigments and solvents were smashed on the floor. Several of my other projects, delicate restorations of 19th century city plans, were ripped and stained, ruined beyond repair. They hadn't found the maps, of course. I had them. But that wasn't the point. The point was the message. It was a crude, brutal display of power. A warning shot fired directly into the heart of my life's work. This is what we can do. This is how easily we can destroy you. I stood there, amidst the wreckage of my quiet sanctuary, and I felt something shift inside me. The fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It compressed under the immense pressure of the threat, the betrayal, and the violation, and it transformed into something hard and sharp and diamond pure. It became a cold, white-hot fury. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing evened out. The tears that had been welling in my eyes evaporated. It wasn't about revenge when I found the ledger. It wasn't about revenge when Marcus threatened me. It was about truth. It was about history. But standing there, in the ruins of my studio, looking at the wanton destruction meant to terrify me into submission, I felt a new clarity. It wasn't about revenge until it was. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Julian. Bryn, oh my God, I just heard. The studio. Are you okay? I'm on my way. His voice was a performance of concern. Don't bother, I said, my own voice flat, devoid of any emotion. What? What do you mean? My father. He wouldn't do something like this. But his denial was weak, his voice lacking the ring of conviction. He knew. He had to know his father was capable of this, and he was still making excuses. Goodbye, Julian, I said, and I hung up the phone. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was on my own. And I knew, with that same chilling certainty, what I had to do. The Willoughbys thought they could bury their ghosts. I was about to become a ghost myself. A ghost in their machine. A quiet, unseen force that would dismantle their beautiful, terrible lie, piece by piece. The wreckage of my studio was a brutal education. It taught me that Marcus Willoughby didn't play by the rules of civil discourse. He played to win, using fear and destruction as his primary tools. A direct confrontation would be professional suicide. Releasing the maps to a local newspaper would be a fool's errand. Marcus's influence was woven so deeply into the fabric of Charleston that he could kill the story, discredit me as a hysterical jilted fiancé, and paint the maps as forgeries before the ink was even dry. I couldn't fight him on his home turf, with his weapons. I had to create a new battlefield, one governed by rules he didn't understand. The unassailable logic of academic rigor and the slow grinding power of historical truth. My grief for Julian and the life I thought I'd have was a raw, open wound. But the cold fury I felt was a powerful anesthetic. It gave me focus. My plan began to form, not as a single, explosive act of revenge, but as a quiet, meticulous deconstruction of the Willoughby legacy. It would be a campaign, fought not with headlines, but with footnotes. My first call, after filing a police report I knew would go nowhere, was to Lena. She didn't offer condolences for my ruined work. She offered solutions. They put you on the defensive, she said, her voice sharp and clear over the phone. So the first thing we do is build a fortress. Lena worked in cybersecurity, a world of firewalls and encryption that was as foreign to me as quantum physics. That afternoon, she came to my apartment and transformed my digital life. She installed encrypted communication apps, set up secure cloud storage for the high-resolution images of the maps, and swept my devices for any tracking software. From now on, you assume they are always listening, she warned. We go dark, She helped me find a small month-to-month office space in a nondescript building on the other side of town. Registered under a shell company she set up in minutes. This would be my new base of operations, my war room. Lena was my rock, the practical logistical anchor in the storm of my emotions. My next step was to find an ally in the world of history, someone with unimpeachable credentials who couldn't be bought or bullied. My mind immediately went to Dr. Elias Vance. I had taken his seminar on Atlantic history in grad school. He was a brilliant, notoriously cantankerous academic who had retired a few years prior after a very public falling out with the university's history department, a department that received a significant portion of its funding from the Willoughby Foundation. He'd accused them of historical malpractice, of sanding the rough edges off of Charleston's history to make it more palatable for wealthy donors. He was the perfect person, a man with a brilliant mind and a pre-existing grudge. Finding him wasn't easy. He lived in a small, book-choked house out in the low country, surrounded by marshland and history. I drove out, unannounced, a folio of the encrypted map images clutched in my hand. He answered the door, looking irritated, his white hair a chaotic halo around his head. "I'm retired, young lady. I don't take on new students or consult on flea market finds," he grumbled before I could even introduce myself. "I'm not a student, Dr. Vance," I said, holding his gaze. "And this is not a flea market find. My name is Bryn Collier." I was engaged to Julian Willoughby. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, flickered with interest. He knew the name. He ushered me inside. His house smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and righteous indignation. I laid out the story, carefully, methodically, ending with the images on my tablet. He leaned in, his skepticism melting away as he examined the faint ledger script. He put on a pair of spectacles and traced the lines on the screen with a gnarled finger. He was silent for a long, long time. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Finally, he leaned back, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed. Josiah Willoughby, that self-righteous, glorified pirate. His academic curiosity was fully lit, but it was more than that. It was vindication. For years, he'd suspected the official Willoughby origin story was a fabrication, a carefully constructed piece of historical propaganda. And here it was, the smoking gun. "This, my dear girl," he said, his eyes gleaming, "is not just a map, it's a confession." Dr. Vance was in. He would be my authenticator, the unassailable academic voice that would give my discovery its power. But I needed more. I needed a way to understand the enemy's camp, to anticipate Marcus's moves. My mind turned to a less obvious potential ally, Julian's younger cousin, Eleanor Willoughby. Eleanor was the family's artistic black sheep, while the other cousins pursued law and finance. She had gone to art school and now ran a small, struggling gallery downtown. I remembered a conversation we'd had at a family brunch, months before my world imploded. We were standing by the perfectly manicured gardens, and she gestured back at the grand house. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she'd said, with a sigh. "Sometimes I feel like we're all just unpaid actors in a historical reenactment. The family's charity work, it feels more like brand management than helping people." Her words had stuck with me. She saw the artifice. She felt trapped by it. Reaching out to her was a huge risk. She was a Willoughby, but my instincts told me she was more of a prisoner than a guard. I contacted her through a generic email, asking if she'd be willing to sell a piece from a local artist in her gallery. We met for coffee, and I kept the conversation light, talking about art and the city. Then I carefully broached the subject. "I'm working on a personal research project," I said, choosing my words with extreme care, "about the real economic foundations of some of Charleston's oldest families. It's so hard to find primary source documents that haven't been curated by the families themselves." I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She was cautious, guarded. "The family archives are kept at the estate," she said, slowly. Uncle Marcus is the gatekeeper. Nothing gets in or out without his approval. I was thinking of things he might not consider important. I pressed gently. Old account books he might have overlooked. Personal journals from female ancestors. Anything that shows the day-to-day life, not just the official story. She looked down at her coffee, a thoughtful frown on her face. "Why are you doing this, Bryn?" she asked, her voice low. "After everything that happened with Julian." I took a breath and made a calculated gamble. I wouldn't show her the maps, not yet. That was too much. But I would give her a piece of the truth. "Because your great-great-great-grand-uncle Josiah was not the man the family believes he was," I said quietly. "And the legacy you've been forced to carry is a lie. I think you've always suspected that, haven't you?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then she gave me a curt nod. "I'll see what I can find," she whispered. My subplot had its first, tentative actor. With my allies in place, the three-phase plan solidified in my mind. Phase 1 was authentication. This was Dr. Vance's domain. We spent weeks in my secret office, which he nicknamed the Truth Bunker. He was a whirlwind of academic energy. We cross-referenced every detail from the ledger. He pulled out obscure maritime archives, records from British and Dutch trading companies, and even the logs of Royal Navy ships that had patrolled the African coast. We found them. The Pearl, the Charity, the Good Intent. They were all there, listed in official records as merchant vessels owned by a subsidiary of the Willoughby Trading Company. But Dr. Vance, with his encyclopedic knowledge, found the corresponding mentions in abolitionist pamphlets from London, describing those same ships as notorious slavers. We were building a web of corroboration, an ironclad case that would be impossible for any serious historian to refute. We documented everything, scanning thousands of pages of archival material to link to our central thesis. Phase 2 was undermining the legacy. In Marcus's power came from the Willoughby, name being synonymous with benevolence and civic pride. I would use his own strategy against him. I took the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house with Julian, and I used it to create a non-profit foundation. I called it the Charleston Maritime History Project. Its mission statement, written with Lena's help, was deliberately anodyne, dedicated to fostering a deeper, unvarnished understanding of the economic and social forces that shaped our city's history. I secured a loan against the value of my legitimate and quite valuable collection of historical maps to provide the rest of the funding. The foundation was real, it was well-funded, and it was, for now, completely anonymous. Its first official act would be to host a major historical symposium. Phase 3 was the lever. This was the endgame. When the time was right, I wouldn't be the one to break the story. I wouldn't be the jilted ex-fiancé with a vendetta. Instead, the full, unassailable dossier, the map images, Dr. Vance's research, the corroborating documents from archives around the world, would be handed over to an entity that Marcus Willoughby couldn't touch. I was researching investigative documentary firms, the kind that won awards for their unflinching exposés. But I was also considering Dr. Vance's suggestion, a major European university, with a department dedicated to studying the history of the slave trade. They would have the academic weight and the institutional courage to publish the findings without fear of reprisal from a provincial American dynasty. The maps themselves, the physical proof, would be donated to their archive, forever preserved and accessible to scholars, a permanent testament to the truth. The plan was audacious, terrifying, and it consumed me. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. I was no longer just a map restorer. I was a historical detective, an activist, an avenger. The ghosts of the Willoughby ledger were no longer just whispering. They were demanding their story be told, and I was going to make sure the whole world heard it. The first move had to be silent, but significant. It needed to be a ripple that only Marcus Willoughby would recognize as the precursor to a tsunami. Firing a direct shot was out of the question that would give him a clear target. Instead, I opted for the quiet, unnerving creep of psychological warfare, cloaked in the respectable guise of academia. With Lena's tech-savvy help, we launched the website for the Charleston Maritime History Project. It was professional, sleek, and utterly innocuous. It featured articles on colonial shipbuilding techniques, profiles of forgotten local merchants, and essays on the city's architectural evolution. It looked like any other earnest, slightly dull historical society website. But buried on the events page was the announcement: the CMHP's inaugural symposium, to be held in 6 weeks' time. The theme was commerce and conscience, the economic realities of 18th century Atlantic trade, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Elias Vance. To anyone else in Charleston, it meant nothing. A retired professor giving a lecture. But to Marcus, it would be a declaration of war. He knew who Dr. Vance was. He knew of their history, of Vance's vocal disdain for the sanitized version of history the Willoughbys promoted. He would see Vance's name and know, instantly, that this was my doing. He would understand that the symposium's bland title was a direct reference to the slave ledger. He would know that I hadn't been scared into silence. I had been busy. I didn't have to wait long for the reaction. 2 days after the website went live, my encrypted phone buzzed. It was Julian. I almost didn't answer, but I knew his call would be the first tremor from the earthquake I had started. I let him speak. "Bryn, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. "A symposium, with Elias Vance. Are you out of your mind?" "My father is. He's losing it. He's been on the phone all morning. He says you're trying to blackmail us." "It's an academic conference, Julian," I said, my voice calm and even. I was proud of how steady I sounded. "It has nothing to do with you or your family. It's about history." "Don't play dumb," he snapped, the desperation making him sound childish. "You know exactly what this looks like. You have to call it off, now." "I can't do that," I said. "The invitations have already gone out to academics all over the country. Dr. Vance is preparing his keynote. It's out of my hands." It was a lie, of course. It was entirely in my hands. But it was a lie he couldn't disprove. "What do you want, Bryn?" he pleaded, his tone shifting from anger to bargaining. "Money? Do you want money? Just name a price. My father will pay it. Just make this go away." The offer, so bald-faced and crude, solidified my resolve. They still thought this was about me. They couldn't conceive of a motive that didn't involve a price tag. "I don't want your family's money, Julian," I said, and the disgust in my voice was real. "I have to go." I hung up before he could respond. An hour later, Marcus himself called. The number was blocked, but I knew it was him. I let the recording app on my phone start before I answered. "Bryn," he said. There was no preamble, no greeting. His voice was stripped of all its usual charm. It was flat, hard, and dangerous. "A clever move, I'll grant you that. Using Vance, it's theatrical." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, sticking to the script of plausible deniability. "Dr. Vance is a respected historian." "Stop it," he growled. "Let's stop the games. You've made your point. You weren't intimidated. And now, what is your price? You want the $250,000 I offered? Fine. You want $500,000? You want me to personally fund a museum for you, with your name on the door? And done. Anything. I will give you anything you want. In return, you give me the maps, and this symposium's of yours vanishes." It was the offer of a lifetime. Everything a person in my profession could ever dream of. My own museum. In limited funding, and all it would cost was my soul. All it would cost was silencing the ghosts in that ledger forever. "History belongs to everyone, Marcus," I said, my voice as quiet as a prayer. "It's not for sale." I savored the dead, frustrated silence on the other end of the line before I disconnected the call. The recording was saved. Another piece of evidence for my dossier. They were no longer just covering up a past crime. They were actively trying to bribe and extort me in the present. And I had the proof. My subplot, meanwhile, was beginning to bear fruit. A week after the symposium was announced, I received an encrypted message from Eleanor. It was just 2 words: "He knows." I called her on a secure line. Her voice was a frightened whisper. "Uncle Marcus called a family meeting," she said, speaking quickly. Just the core family. He knows about the symposium. He knows it's you. He's terrified. I've never seen him like this. He looked at me and Julian and the others, and he told us that the family was under attack from a bitter, unstable woman, and that none of us were to have any contact with you. He said you were trying to destroy us with vicious lies. What else did he say? I asked, my heart pounding. This was invaluable. He's panicking, she said. After the main meeting, I overheard him on the phone with the family's wealth manager. He's trying to liquidate assets. Specifically, he wants to sell 2 of the historic properties downtown that the Willoughby Preservation Trust owns. He said he needed to increase liquidity and reduce public-facing liabilities. Bryn, what is on those maps? What is it that has him so terrified? He's starting to sell off the family jewels. The time had come to trust her. It's a ledger, Eleanor, I said. A record of how Josiah Willoughby really made his fortune. I explained what I had found. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a long, heavy silence. I had either just made the best decision of my campaign, or the worst. I knew it, she finally whispered. Her voice thick, with a strange mix of horror and relief. I always knew something was wrong. The story never added up. The speed of the wealth, the way they obsessively control the narrative, it all makes sense now. The fear in her voice was replaced by a hard anger that mirrored my own. That hypocrite, that self-righteous, pontificating hypocrite, standing on stages, talking about civic virtues, while sitting on a pile of money made from human suffering. Eleanor, I said, pressing my advantage. Dr. Vance and I have corroborated most of the ledger with external records, but one thing that would make the case airtight would be internal family records, old financial charters, incorporation documents, anything that links the Willoughby Trading Company directly to those specific ships. The original charters, she breathed. I know where they are. They're in the floor safe in the study, the one behind the portrait of Josiah. It was a stunning piece of ironic symbolism. It's a family tradition. On our 18th birthday, he shows us the charters, a reminder of where we come from. I remember the combination. Can you get them? I asked, my own breath catching. It was an enormous risk to ask of her. There was a pause. For years I have felt like a fraud, living off this thing I couldn't name, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I've been a beneficiary of this crime without even knowing it. Getting those charters isn't just for you, Bryn. It's for me. I'll get them. The silent takeover was working. Marcus was in a state of escalating panic, making rash financial decisions. My allies were committed. The machinery of my plan was in motion, grinding slowly, inexorably, towards the heart of the Willoughby Empire. Marcus thought he was fighting a public relations battle, one he could win with money and threats. He had no idea that he was actually a patient on an operating table, and I was the surgeon, methodically cutting away the diseased tissue of his family's lies. The announcement of the symposium acted like a stone thrown into the murky, still pond of the Willoughby family. The ripples spread outward, creating chaos and confusion far beyond Marcus's immediate control. While he was focused on me, he failed to realize that the greatest threat was now coming from within his own ranks. His power, which had always seemed absolute, was built on a foundation of control and carefully managed information. With that control slipping, the entire structure began to groan under the strain. The extended Willoughby clan, the uncles in finance, the aunts who ran charities, the cousins who were partners in prestigious law firms, started to get nervous. They were not privy to the specific secret of the slave ledger, but they were astute enough to smell smoke. They saw the symposium announcement, headlined by a known antagonist of their patriarch. They heard the whispers that Bryn Collier, the spurned fiancé, was behind it. They connected the dots and arrived at a simple, terrifying conclusion. A scandal was brewing, and Marcus was at the center of it. Their loyalty, it turned out, was only as strong as the family's stock price. They began to call him, their conversations shifting from polite inquiries to panicked demands for information. What was this about? Why was Vance involved? Was it true that he was quietly selling off trust properties, their carefully curated lives of quiet luxury and social prestige, were suddenly at risk. The Willoughby name, which had always been a key that opened every door, now felt like a liability, a potential stain they might not be able to wash off. The family exodus began not as a stampede, but as a series of quiet, strategic withdrawals. Lawyers were consulted. Financial advisors were put on alert. Alliances shifted. The monolithic family, once united behind their leader, began to fracture into self-interested factions, each looking to protect their own assets from the coming storm. Marcus, feeling his authority crumble, became even more desperate. And in his desperation, he made his final, most cruel move. He decided to use the one weapon he had left that he thought I couldn't defend against my heart. He sent Julian. He showed up at my apartment late one evening. I saw him through the peephole, and for a moment, I considered not opening the door, but I knew I had to see this through to the end. I had to face this ghost, too. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, there were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The confident, easy charm was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged desperation. He didn't get angry, he didn't threaten me. He began to plead. "Bryn, please," he said, his voice hoarse. "You have to stop this. It's tearing my family apart. My mother, she's a wreck. She doesn't understand any of this. She just knows that the family is in some kind of trouble, and that you're at the center of it. She cries all the time. She's innocent in all this, Bryn. She's a good person. What you're doing is destroying her." It was a masterful piece of emotional manipulation. The invocation of his mother, a woman I had genuinely liked, a gentle soul, who spent her days gardening and hosting charity luncheons. Was she truly innocent? The question was a valid one for debate. She had lived her entire life in opulent comfort, never questioning the source of the wealth that paid for her orchids and her caterers. Her ignorance was a luxury paid for by the suffering of others. But seeing the genuine pain in Julian's eyes as he spoke of her, it was a low blow. "What I'm doing is telling the truth," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "The truth is what's destroying her, Julian, not me." He shook his head, looking past me into my apartment, at the life we were supposed to have shared. "The truth? What about our truth?" he asked, his voice breaking. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took a small folded photograph. It was of the two of us at our engagement party. His arms wrapped around me, both of us beaming, incandescent, with a happiness that now seemed like a mirage from a different lifetime. He held it out to me. "Was any of this real, Bryn? Did you ever love me, or was this all just a long game? If you loved me, you couldn't do this. You couldn't destroy my family, my mother, me." I looked at the photograph, at the smiling, hopeful face of the woman I used to be, and I felt a profound, aching sadness. It was the deepest cut yet, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to guilt me, to shame me, to make this about a personal failing on my part, rather than a moral reckoning for his family. He was trying to make me the villain of a story where his ancestors were the architects of a Holocaust. The logic was so twisted, so emotionally manipulative, that it was almost brilliant in its depravity. I didn't take the photograph. I looked up from it and met his gaze, and I let him see the well of pity in my eyes. Pity for him, for the weak, broken man he had become, a puppet of his father's sins. "I loved the man I thought you were, Julian," I said, and my voice was a whisper of finality. "I mourned him the day my studio was trashed. The man I loved would never have asked me to bury a crime to protect his comfort. The man I loved would have been standing here with me, helping me fight." A tear traced a path down his cheek. He finally understood. He had no power over me anymore. The love he was trying to weaponize was already dead. He slowly folded the photograph and put it back in his wallet, the gesture a small funeral for what we once had. He turned and walked away without another word, a hunched, defeated figure disappearing down the hallway. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs weak. The confrontation hadn't been loud or violent, but it had taken every last ounce of my strength. I had survived the final emotional assault. The power had irrevocably shifted. Marcus had played his last card, and it was a dud. He was isolated, his family was in revolt, and his last weapon had been neutralized. The stage was now set for the final act. The quiet, meticulous work was done. It was time for the vindication. The night of the annual Willoughby Founders Gala was a major event in Charleston, a glittering affair where the city's elite came to pay homage to the family and its legacy. This year, however, a shadow hung over the festivities. My symposium was scheduled for the following week, and the whispers had grown to a dull roar. Marcus knew he was out of time. His attempts to bribe, threaten, and emotionally manipulate me had all failed. His family was fracturing. He was a king on a rapidly shrinking island, with the tide of truth rising all around him. That evening, as Charleston's finest were adjusting their bow ties and stepping into limousines, I received one final, terse message from Marcus's lawyer. He requested a meeting, not at the estate, not at my apartment, neutral ground, his downtown office. A final opportunity to resolve this matter amicably, the message read. I knew what it was. A last, desperate attempt at a settlement before the world found out his secret. I agreed to go. I brought nothing with me but my phone and a slim leather portfolio. The office was on the top floor of a skyscraper that bore the Willoughby name on its facade. The irony was not lost on me. The space was cavernous and silent, the city lights twinkling below like a silent, indifferent audience. Marcus was there, looking a decade older than he had a few weeks ago. His face was gray, his movements stiff. Julian stood behind him, near the vast window, a silent, hollowed-out sentinel. He wouldn't look at me. Bryn, Marcus began, his voice raspy. He gestured to the massive mahogany conference table. Please, I sat, placing my portfolio on the polished wood in front of me. Marcus slid a thick legal document across the table towards me. This is a settlement agreement, he said, his voice devoid of its usual power. It was the voice of a man on the verge of ruin. It grants you a sum of $5 million. It also establishes a charitable foundation in your name, to be funded by my family in perpetuity. You can build your museum. You can do whatever you want with it. In return, the maps are to be turned over to us, to be sealed in our private archive. And you will sign a non-disclosure agreement, binding you to permanent silence on this matter. The symposium will be cancelled. He was still trying to buy the truth. Even at the bitter end, he believed everything had a price. I looked at the document, at the staggering sum of money that would have once changed my life. Now, it just looked like ink on paper. I didn't touch his offer. Instead, I opened my own portfolio and slid a tablet across the table to him. I think you should see this first, I said quietly. Marcus frowned, confused. He tapped the screen. It came to life, and the hushed, professional voice of a narrator filled the silent room. It was the opening sequence of a documentary trailer. The screen showed sweeping, atmospheric shots of Charleston's harbor, of old, moss-draped oaks. Then it cut to Dr. Elias Vance, sitting in his book-lined study, his face grim and authoritative. For 2 centuries, one of Charleston's most prominent families has promoted a story of honor and civic duty, Vance said, his voice dripping with academic gravamen. But the foundation of their immense fortune is not in shipping or trade. It's in a secret they've guarded for generations. A secret written in the blood of the enslaved. The screen flashed with high-resolution, multispectral images of the ledger. The spidery script was magnified. The names of the ships, the tally of human lives, the cold calculation of profit, all made starkly, horrifically clear. The trailer intercut these images with footage of the Willoughby name on the university library, on the hospital wing, on the gala invitations. It was a masterpiece of damning contrast. It featured soundbites from 2 other renowned historians, one from London, one from Amsterdam, confirming Vance's findings and the authenticity of the ledger. Marcus stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked like he had been turned to stone. Julian, drawn by the sound, came to stand behind his father, his eyes wide with horror, as he watched the public demolition of his family's name. When the 2-minute trailer ended, I spoke into the ringing silence. That's a preview, I said calmly. The full 90-minute documentary, titled The Willoughby Ledger, along with the entire unassailable dossier of our research. Every corroborating document, every cross-referenced shipping manifest, every abolitionist report, has been securely transferred to the archives of Leiden University in the Netherlands. They are renowned for their work on the transatlantic slave trade. They've verified our findings and are co-sponsoring the release. I let that sink in. I had taken it out of his reach, placed it in the hands of an institution he couldn't touch, couldn't influence, couldn't buy. The documentary is scheduled for a global online release in 48 hours, distributed for free to educational institutions and news organizations worldwide. I continued, my voice even and measured. The original maps are already in a vault in Leiden, a permanent donation to their historical archives. The Charleston Maritime History Project is fully endowed and will continue its work, hosting this symposium every single year, ensuring that the true Willoughby legacy is never forgotten. Marcus finally looked up from the tablet. The ruthless patriarch, the titan of industry, was gone. In his place was a frail, old man, his eyes hollow with the shock of absolute defeat. He had been so focused on putting out the fire in his own backyard that he hadn't realized I had already set the whole world ablaze. Julian stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was looking at me, as if for the first time, not as his fiancé, not as a woman to be managed, but as the architect of his family's complete and utter ruin. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked Marcus directly in the eye. You taught me the value of legacy, Marcus, I said, my voice soft but clear. You spoke of honor, of duty, of the importance of the past. I took your lessons to heart. I'm just making sure your legacy is finally accurate. I left his settlement papers on the table, untouched. I turned and walked towards the door, my footsteps echoing in the vast, silent office. I didn't look back. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the two of them alone in the wreckage of their gilded history. The city lights glittering below like scattered, worthless jewels. It was over. The ghosts had been heard. In the days that followed, the world tilted. The documentary didn't just get released. It exploded. It was a global phenomenon. A searing, undeniable indictment of a lie that had festered for centuries. News outlets picked it up, academic journals wrote about it, and social media turned the Willoughby name into a hashtag for historical hypocrisy. The fallout in Charleston was catastrophic and swift. The Willoughby name, once a symbol of prestige, became toxic overnight. The university senate convened an emergency session and voted to remove the family name from the library. The hospital followed suit, quietly replacing the plaque on the Willoughby wing. Old friends stopped returning Marcus's calls. The gala, which I heard had ended in a confused panic that night, was the last they would ever host. The family, which had already been fracturing, shattered completely. With their reputation in tatters, the brand value that had propped up their real estate and investment firms evaporated. The fortune, built on a crime and sustained by a lie, began to crumble. I heard through Eleanor that the cousins and uncles were lawyering up, suing Marcus and each other over what little remained. A pack of wolves fighting over the scraps of a carcass. Marcus became a recluse, a prisoner in his own white-pillared mansion, a pariah in the city he once ruled. Eleanor, finally free from the weight of the family name, sold her gallery and used the money to move to New York. She sent me a postcard a few months later. All it said was, "Thank you." As for Julian, I heard he left Charleston not long after the documentary aired. He couldn't escape the name, but he was running from it. A man forever, haunted by a legacy he had tried to protect. I felt a pang of sadness for the man he could have been, but it was a distant, faded ache, like a scar from an old, forgotten wound. I didn't stay in Charleston either. The city held too many ghosts, both ancient and recent. I sold my legitimate map collection, which, thanks to the notoriety of the Willoughby case, fetched a surprisingly high price. With the money and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, I moved up the coast. I opened a new studio, larger and better equipped than my old one. It's a quiet place, filled with light and the smell of old paper. My work continues, but something in me has changed. I no longer see maps as just a record of coastlines and currents. I see them as human documents, filled with stories, truths, and sometimes secrets that have been deliberately hidden. My job is to restore the paper and the ink, but my purpose, I now realize, is to restore the truth. They say you shouldn't dig up the past, that you should let sleeping dogs lie. But some pasts were never really buried. They were just hidden in plain sight, their poison seeping into the soil, nourishing the roots of fortunes and poisoning the ground for generations. My ex-fiancé, in his panic, had asked me what good revealing the truth would possibly do. It's a question I've thought about a lot, and the answer is, it doesn't change what happened 200 years ago. It can't bring back the souls lost in the bellies of those ships. But it can change what happens next. It can stop a lie from being passed down as a legacy. It can strip the honor from a name that was never honorable to begin with. It can give a voice, however late, back to the ghosts who were silenced by greed. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about balance. It was about setting the historical record straight. It was about making sure that a fortune built on a crime, finally, after 2 long centuries, paid its dues. So I want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between a comfortable lie and a painful, disruptive truth? What would you have done? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're interested in more stories about long-buried secrets being brought into the light, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening.